To the curious, the seekers, and to the experts, happy Independence Day. We at Poli-Psych Podcast decided that in celebration of the holiday, we would examine the Enneagram types of 4 of the Founding Fathers. And the 4 that we chose are George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And Ken is on a brief vacation, so he's not with us today. But I am Cindy, INFJ, Enneagram 2, and Don is also here.
Hi, I am glad to be here, and as always, and I am INTJ in the Myers-Briggs MBTI, and Enneagram 5 social subtype.
Great, and we're both happy to be here and looking forward to the actual holiday tomorrow. We're recording on Wednesday, and I suppose the most well-known and best loved of the Founding Fathers is George Washington. So perhaps we can begin a discussion of the Enneagram type of George Washington. What are your thoughts, Don?
Well, one of the phrases that comes to mind is John Adams' reaction when he saw Washington come into the room. And this is as it's portrayed in the HBO series John Adams. And he said, well, a natural born leader. And I'm guessing because of that, there's something about presence that people that are will types, and especially 8s or 9s, carry with them when they come into a room, especially 8s. People know that they are the one in charge. And if there's more than one, there's a virtual duel there to decide who's the dominant one. And George Washington, being tall, had a natural physical presence, but it seems it was more than that. He had the physical leadership ability that would be associated with a military commander. So my off-the-cuff guess is 9 wing 8 or 8 wing 9. I'm guessing really more of a 9 because George Washington was very good at staying in the middle on a lot of the political discourse of the day and wanted the revolution to succeed, the new government to succeed. He didn't take partisan sides at all if he could avoid it. And whereas an 8 per se would have relished more of the battle and got into the nitty gritty more, 8s would be perceived as a natural leader, but might not carry everybody along with them the way a 9 could. And George Washington certainly did that. So I'm guessing he also had a 1 wing as a 9, if he is a 9, and that's my best guess, that he would have both an 8 wing and a 9 wing that would be apparent in his personality. So, there are times when George Washington did make unpopular stands, basically to enforce his rulership or his military commander. He threatened to execute those that deserted, and people knew it wasn't an empty threat. So he didn't, as much as he wanted to avoid political partisanship, he was not at all shy of standing for what he believed was essential in his role as a military commander. So I'm saying this is a guy that doesn't have a problem taking a stand, and that would be his 1 wing in operation there. So that's how I see George Washington in the Enneagram.
That's great. Yeah, it seems that in many circumstances he exercised a lot of restraint too, and he seems to have been one of the calming influences in this group, which it's kind of a rowdy bunch, and he seems to be one of the more stable and one of the, from what we can tell from history, one of the calmer.
And everybody wants a calm father, right? So the father of our country how appropriate that calming figure be a 9.
Everybody wants a calm father. That is true. And I'm guessing another will type here, John Adams. And he has such a 1 look, as far as I'm concerned, and that's not very scientific. But and it's not scientific to take hip shots at what people's Enneagram types might be, but I do tend to do that, and if and as I do that, I tend to go a lot by body type and sometimes the appearance, well, pretty much always the appearance of the face. And if I had to type John Adams just based on his appearance, I think that I could be fairly confident in typing him as a 1.
Yeah, I'll agree with you, but I will note that a lot of 1s are very wiry looking. They're not as rotund as John Adams was famous for being. So, whether that is a 9-wing in operation or whether he is just, that didn't have the physical aspects that a lot of 1s have, it's unclear. And I go a little bit by body type. But what I did notice about John Adams in that painting, and I think the artist probably captured something there, was the eyes. And they're kind of piercing. They're also, appears to be squinting a little bit. He's giving you the once over. He's examining you with the fine-tooth comb of his own conscious discernment, and that 1s are famous for. 1s are well known as being ethical moralists, people that know what's right and wrong. They've expended a lot amount of time and energy trying to determine that. That's what their life's purpose is often is about. And as a lawyer, John Adams would have done that. And there is the famous portion of his life early in the American Revolution, when after the so-called Boston Massacre, John Adams actually took the position of supporting the British in that event, and that did not make him a popular figure with the colonists, and but it did position him as to be a party that could work both sides of the fence politically across the aisle, and a lot of people didn't consider him enough of a populist, thought that he was a little bit too much aligned with aristocracy. And there is something about 1s that does enjoy social status too. Quite different from, say, a 4 that, although they might have it, they kind of pretend that they don't have it. John Adams maybe didn't have it as much as Washington or Jefferson or even Benjamin Franklin did, but he acted the part, and he was actually advocated for the title of the president to be His Excellency, and he was ridiculed for that, and probably rightly so. So there's something about 1s that are attracted to aristocracy, and I think that fits here with John Adams.
Well, maybe he had a 2-wing, and that accounts for his having a slightly more round appearance than many 1s have. And now in this portrait, he does have a kind face, but it's also a firm face. And I think that a lot of what we know about him from history indicates that I don't want to say he was judgmental or self-righteous, but that he had very, very strong ethics and intended that they be imposed on others when possible.
And yet he had a nurturing enough personality, at least if you think of he and his wife Abigail as a unit, then they had one of their sons, John Quincy Adams, become president. So that says a lot for the character of the man, that he not only was one of the first presidents, but that he raised a president as well.
Absolutely. That's a very significant aspect of his life. And I think that we're probably ready to move to a discussion of Benjamin Franklin. Would you like to take a shot at typing Benjamin Franklin?
Well, of course, a famous scientist, the whole discoverer of electricity thing and the kite with the key on it and all of that. Very well known in Europe as being a famous scientist, discoverer of things. And he is had a very active mind and was not only operating in the political or legal realm, but more in the scientific realm, but a very educated man, a man with a very active mind. So I would say definitely mental type for sure. And his gregarious nature pretty much ensures that as a mental type, he would be either a 6 or a 7. And if a 6, then a 6 with a 7 wing. So I'm just going to say I'm pretty sure that Benjamin Franklin was a 7. And if you've ever known a 7 with a scientific mind, I think you'd probably see some similarities in as far as how they conducted themselves, both socially and in the realm of science. It's not at all lacking for things to do, things to discover. He is basically the elder statesman in the American Revolution. His wisdom was imparted to Thomas Jefferson in the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the phraseology that was used. He would study the language and make sure that it was representative of the entire population and all the different voices. And so he became a kind of the de facto father of the birth of the nation. I think whereas Washington's role came a little bit later as being the general that fought the war. Perhaps Benjamin Franklin was more influential in actually drawing the lines that began the war. And that's something that is not commonly associated with 7s. It's they typically don't get into conflict if they can avoid it. They are the ones that like to stay with the pleasantries. But I think it was Benjamin Franklin's education and perhaps an 8 wing that enabled him to decide that this is a war that needs to be fought. This is a line that needs to be drawn, and we can't avoid it. And at the same time, he continued to maintain good relationships with the people in Europe. I believe at one time, of course, there was a price on his head, but nevertheless, after that period of time passed, he was an ambassador to France, I believe, and had other roles abroad outside of America after the revolution was fought. So all things of a very gregarious nature. He's not known for having a large estate or a farm like some of the other founding fathers were. And he was basically, he was a printer, Poor Richard Almanac when he was young. All very mental things and not necessarily very oriented towards the agrarian life, but more of the life in the big city. Something that an active 7 would very much enjoy.
Well, yes, and he definitely has the appearance of someone who enjoys their food, good food, and living well. And as it's known, that's the 7s are kind of famous for that. So yeah.
Yeah, one of the nicknames is the epicure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense considering Benjamin Franklin and many of the stories that we've heard about him. Now we come to who I would consider my favorite. I guess I've saved the best for last. And that is Thomas Jefferson. And he seems to have been a delightful man. And I would guess that although there are certainly many indications that he might have been a mental type because he had so many inventions and was obviously very intelligent. But we've discussed this, and my first thought is that he might be a 4.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. I think there's a strong possibility that Jefferson was a 4, and you can kind of see that longing in his eyes there in that picture. And of course, longing is a famous 4 characteristic. I don't know about famous, but it's a well-known characteristics of a 4, that they long for what isn't there, see what's missing. And I think that if Jefferson was a 4, he was a 4-wing 5. He was not someone who was good with public speaking. He was good with writing. And I love reading Jefferson's quotes about liberty and all kinds of applications, because he does seem to have a grasp of the principles that is rare. And, occasionally you get people that are just able to crystallize the key principles, and he does that so well. So there's a possibility that Jefferson was a 5 with a 4-wing. I'm going to say that a 4-wing 5 is also probably a little bit more likely. He had a relationship with one of his slaves that I can't remember the name of her. Was it Sally Hemings? I think that's the name that comes to mind. And then there are people that today trace their ancestry to Jefferson, that are have that red hair, but also a lighter but skin tone that is obviously African American, and some African American features. So that is that kind of relationship is something that a 4 would have. Apparently, Sally Hemings also went with him to live with him in France when he was an ambassador to France. So these are aspects of one's life that wouldn't survive politics today, but it was possible in that day to have a very private life that some people might know about, but that wouldn't be discussed because of your respect for the person. And Thomas Jefferson certainly had the respect of many people. Now here he has kind of the opposite effect that to aristocracy that I described for Adams, where Jefferson actually had a very famous estate, Monticello, and did the architecture on that himself, and had many slaves, because that was necessary in the economy of that day. And although he did fight as hard as he could to have slavery eliminated, it was not possible to get the public opinion to where it needed to be. But yet he had the vision to see that would become America's future, that slaves would not be a part of the economy in the future. Although in some people's eyes that would make him a hypocrite, it's just, in my opinion, that's the reality of the day. We all see things in our own day that we can't change and wish that could be changed. So I see Thomas Jefferson as an idealist who was able to apply those ideals in a very effective way. He became America's 3rd president after John Adams, who was the 2nd, and wasn't a natural leader, but he did do the Louisiana Purchase, which was a huge vision. In it, it did do the one thing that Jefferson said that he wouldn't do, which was to increase the national debt. And that was one of the things that Jefferson thought was actually left out of the Constitution, was to prohibit government borrowing to such a large extent. And maybe he was baited into the Louisiana Purchase, but boy, did that make a difference in the westward expansion. And he sponsored Lewis and Clark expedition that explored that territory. So he was an extreme visionary, and that's something that has a lot in common with many 4s. They're the artistic people who see what isn't and work to make it real. That's part of the artistic temperament. So, yeah, I like Jefferson a lot. He's my favorite as well. And I just appreciate the clarity of his mind so much as regards to the principles of a liberty and the American expression of it.
There's such a strange irony about his being associated with slavery among the other founding fathers. Yes, as you referred to, he was a slaveholder, and he did have a relationship with Sally Heming, but when he died, he numbered her children among his heirs, and I believe he left his plantation to Sally's children. So for him to be maligned as a racist slave owner, considering the times, is really very irrational. And I just recently saw a headline, I just saw it today, that the statue of Thomas Jefferson is going to be taken down in Charlottesville. And there's just such a gross misunderstanding of who he was for people to react in that manner.
I agree, and I think it is actually beyond a misunderstanding. I believe we've been purposely dumbed down not to understand our history, so that the knowledge of our history could be removed by those who want to replace America's foundations. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this broadcast today, is we want to reaffirm America's foundations, reaffirm the vision and unified mission of our founding fathers, and we wanted to use this as a way to do it.
Absolutely. So in celebration of our true history, of our founding fathers, of the Declaration of Independence that was written by Thomas Jefferson, and the war that was fought by George Washington, and all the details that were ironed out by Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, we wish all of you a happy Independence Day, and hope that you have a great holiday with your families.
Glad to be with you. Enjoy, and until next time.
Dear curious seekers and experts, take care.